A millionaire saw his first love walking down the street with a little boy who looks exactly like him. What secrets are buried in this chance encounter? Michael Grayson eased the Mercedes down the narrow road that lined the banks of the Ashley River, the heavy summer air pressing in around him. The city of Charleston, with its old brick buildings and moss draped across the oaks, looked the same as it had 6 years ago. He'd left Charleston with a promise to himself never to return, a promise that had, until now, been kept. His uncle, Richard Grayson, had passed away unexpectedly, leaving the family fortune and business to Michael, under one condition. He had to stay in Charleston for 3 months. As he drove past the familiar streets, each house seemed to echo with memories of his youth, moments he had tried to bury beneath the ambitions of his career in Atlanta. The man who had left this city 6 years ago wasn't the same man coming back now. The years in Atlanta had been filled with success, wealth, recognition, everything he had once thought he wanted. But now, as Charleston's humid air pressed against the car windows, Michael felt the weight of something else, an unsettling emptiness he hadn't anticipated. He parked in front of the Charleston Grand Hotel, the place where he would stay during his time here. His phone buzzed with a message from Cassandra, his fiancée. She was a prominent real estate investor, sharp and successful, the kind of woman Michael had believed would bring him the life he had always dreamed of. The message reminded him of their upcoming wedding, urging him to finish the tasks at hand so they could return to Atlanta. But even as he read her message, he felt a tug in his chest, a strange dissonance. Cassandra represented everything Michael had worked for, but in her polished world, something was missing. His thoughts drifted back to Charleston, to the way it felt to grow up here, to Emma. A sharp pang shot through him. He quickly pushed it aside, focusing instead on the work ahead. Yet the emptiness remained. Michael decided to take a walk. The streets of downtown Charleston, with their cobblestones and old shop fronts, had an undeniable pull. He walked without purpose, his mind half on the work awaiting him, half on the weight of being back. That's when he saw her. Emma Carter, his first love, the one who had broken his heart 6 years ago when she had suddenly ended their relationship without explanation. She was sitting by the window of a small bakery, laughing with a young boy. Michael stopped in his tracks. The boy had striking blue eyes, the same color as his own, the same smile. It hit him like a wave. Before he could take another step, Emma looked up and caught his gaze. Her face instantly changed, the smile fading, her eyes narrowing. She quickly stood, gathering the boy in her arms. The action was hurried, almost defensive. Michael walked toward the bakery, the desire to confront her, to understand, pulling him forward. But as he reached the door, Emma was already moving toward the back, slipping away with the boy. He stood frozen in the doorway, watching them disappear through the back exit. The feeling of abandonment returned, familiar and sharp. The bakery staff greeted him politely, but Michael barely heard their words. His eyes remained fixed on the spot where Emma and the boy had vanished, 1,000 questions racing through his mind. Who was the boy? And why did he look so much like him? He stood there, staring at the door through which they had disappeared. His chest tightened as memories of Emma and their bitter breakup resurfaced. It seemed so long ago, yet all of it was so vivid. He had left Charleston in a fit of anger, cutting ties with Emma, not knowing that she was pregnant with his child. And now, after all these years, he was back, only to find that his life, which had seemed so firmly under control, was spiraling into something completely unexpected. When morning came, he stood ready in a sharp suit at 8:45 a.m. for his scheduled meeting at Charleston Technologies. But his thoughts were miles away, far from any corporate matters. As he entered the hotel lobby, his assistant, Mr. Grayson, approached him with the revised documents. I've got the revised paperwork. And cancel the meeting? Michael cut him off, his tone sharp and final. But, sir, the shareholders reschedule for next week, he ordered firmly, leaving no room for argument. Without waiting for a response, Michael walked briskly toward his car, his mind racing. His next stop was the old estate that had once belonged to his uncle. Now it was solely his legacy, the grand Cassandra mansion still holding a quiet dignity, though a little worn by time. In the garden, he saw Rose, the long-time housekeeper who had been a fixture in the Grayson family for decades. I knew you'd come back, Rose said, her hands deftly tending to the roses that his uncle had once adored. Richard always said you'd find your way back, Michael. Michael hesitated. I need to ask you something about Emma Carter, he began, his voice unsteady. The moment he said her name, Rose's demeanor shifted, a flicker of recognition passing through her eyes. Ah, so you know about Lucas? Rose asked. The name struck Michael like a blow. Lucas. That was his son. His son. Why had no one told him? Why didn't anyone tell me? He demanded, the frustration and confusion rising in his chest. Rose placed her gardening tools down slowly and met his gaze with a mixture of sympathy and reproach. Your uncle tried, Michael. He called you, but you never returned him calls, she said quietly, her voice tinged with the weight of unspoken years. He closed his eyes, the guilt flooding in. How many times had he ignored his uncle's efforts to reconnect? He had always dismissed his calls as his way of trying to pull him back into the life he had fled from. But now, hearing Rose's words, it felt like a sharp slap. Emma tried too, Rose continued. In the beginning, she looked for you, but you vanished, changed everything. Your phone number, your email, completely disappeared. The memory of that time came rushing back. The argument, the bitter words exchanged, his impulsive decision to leave for Atlanta. He had cut all ties, convinced that leaving was the only way to escape. She was pregnant when I left, he muttered, the words feeling hollow as they left his mouth. Rose nodded, her gaze softening. She didn't know it then. She found out 2 weeks later. Richard helped her throughout her pregnancy. Became a grandfather to Lucas too. Michael sank down onto the nearby bench, the weight of the truth crashing over him. A noise from the garden fence made him look up. There, peering through the slats, was Lucas. The boy had his eyes, green, curious, searching. The moment their gazes locked, Michael felt a jolt. The same eyes, the same innocent wonder. Lucas, a voice called from behind, sharp and urgent. Lucas, come here! The boy quickly disappeared, vanishing into the distance. Michael moved to stand, his heart racing, but Rose held him back, her grip gentle but firm. Give her time, son, she said softly. You can't just walk into their lives after all these years. He's my son. Emma Carter's voice cracked with emotion, her words soft but filled with an undeniable strength. For 6 years, he was mine to raise. I built a life for him, kept him safe from any hurt. You need to earn your place in his life. The weight of her words pressed heavily on Michael Grayson. His phone buzzed once again, likely from Cassandra, his fiancée in Atlanta, wondering why he hadn't responded to her messages. But how could he even think about a wedding when his son, his own flesh and blood, was so close, just down the street, living without knowing him? What should I do, Rose? He asked quietly. The housekeeper glanced up from her work, offering him a soft, understanding smile as she returned her attention to the roses she was tending. Start by doing what's right for once, Michael. Stay. Face the past and fight for your right to be his father. For the first time in 6 years, Michael Grayson felt the weight of his choices. His carefully curated life in Atlanta, the success, the career, everything he had worked for, now seemed fragile, like a house of cards about to fall. And surprisingly, he wasn't afraid. He knew, without a doubt, where he needed to be. The next morning, before the sun even rose, Michael found himself awake, a sense of purpose stirring within him. He dressed in running clothes, something he hadn't done in years, and stepped out into the cool Charleston air. He needed to clear his mind, and walking always helped him think. Without realizing it, his steps led him to the house on Maple Street, the modest two-story home where Emma lived with Lucas. The house, painted a soft shade of blue, stood quiet in the early morning light. A children's bicycle, painted red, lay on the front lawn, along with a few scattered toys, clear signs of Lucas's presence. "Looking for something, Mr. Grayson?" The deep voice startled him. He turned to find Daniel Cooper, Emma's father, standing on the porch, holding a steaming cup of coffee. The warm familiarity he once felt for the older man had been replaced with something colder. "Daniel," Michael began, but the older man cut him off. "Chief Cooper, to you," he replied sharply. "You lost the right to call me Daniel a long time ago." Michael swallowed hard. Daniel had once been like a father to him during his time with Emma. Now the resentment in his voice was unmistakable. "I need to talk to Emma," Michael said. "No, you don't," Daniel replied, his voice firm. "What you need is to go back to your life in Atlanta and leave my daughter and grandson alone." Michael's temper flared. "He's my son too," he shot back. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "A father doesn't abandon his family, Michael. A father doesn't disappear for 6 years without a word." "I didn't know," Michael exploded. His voice echoed through the stillness of the morning. "How could I know if no one told me?" "Keep your voice down," Daniel hissed, glancing nervously toward the house. "Come with me." They walked in silence down the street to a small cafe that had just opened. The aroma of fresh bread and coffee filled the air as they sat at a table in the corner. After a long pause, Daniel began to speak. "Do you know why Emma couldn't tell you?" he asked, his tone softening. Michael shook his head, confusion still clouding his mind. "Because that last night you were together," Daniel began, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the past. "You said something that completely shattered her." Michael frowned, trying to recall the words. "I don't remember—" Daniel's voice was firm as he quoted the words Michael had said all those years ago. "I don't want children. I never did. This small town, this quiet life, it suffocates me. I need more. I deserve more." The memory hit Michael like a blow to the chest. It was true. He had been angry, frustrated that Emma hadn't agreed to move with him to Atlanta, but he hadn't known she was pregnant at the time. "I was angry," Michael muttered, as much to himself as to Daniel. "She was pregnant, and I didn't know." "Exactly," Daniel responded. "When Emma found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after you left, how could she tell you? You made your feelings about children and small towns very clear." Michael felt a deep pang of guilt. He had hurt her more than he had ever realized, but still he couldn't help but think, "But she could have tried. She could have told me." Daniel interrupted him, his voice hard but full of conviction. "She tried. She called. She emailed. She wrote letters. But you were unreachable. You surrounded yourself with walls. You didn't want to be found." The silence between them was heavy. Michael looked out the cafe window, his thoughts consumed by everything he had missed. "What's he like?" he asked, quietly, his voice cracking slightly. Daniel's eyes softened. "Bright. Curious. He has your intelligence, but he's also got Emma's heart. He loves books, and like her, he's got a knack for business. Just last week, he set up a lemonade stand and even made a loyalty system for his customers. A small, proud smile tugged at Michael's lips. "He sounds like a smart kid," he said, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. "Does he ask about me?" Michael Grayson found himself asking, his voice edged with a quiet determination. "Emma told me your father was a businessman, someone who traveled all over. She wanted to shield him from feeling abandoned. She created a story to protect him from the hurt." His grip on the coffee cup tightened. "I need to fix this. I need to be part of his life." Daniel, sitting across from him, raised an eyebrow. "And what about your fiancée in Atlanta?" he asked, catching Michael off guard. "You know how quickly news travels in Charleston. How does she fit into all of this?" Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Cassandra. "Michael, I've booked a flight to Charleston. I'm arriving tomorrow. We need to resolve this together." A wave of panic surged through him. Two worlds, two lives, on the brink of collision. "You've got a lot to work through, Grayson," Daniel remarked, standing up to leave. But before he could walk away, Daniel added, "And Michael, one thing, if you hurt Emma or Lucas again, there's nowhere in this world you can hide from me." Michael remained at the cafe long after Daniel had left, his eyes drifting out the window as the city began to pulse with life. He caught a glimpse of Emma and Lucas walking down the street. Lucas was bouncing around, his laughter light in the cool morning air, his small hand held tightly by Emma's. The sight of them, together and happy, twisted something deep within Michael's chest. Cassandra would be there in less than 24 hours. He could feel the weight of her arrival, her life in Atlanta, their plans, everything pressing in on him. But watching Lucas, his son, Michael understood that certain decisions had already been made. Even though he wasn't ready to face them, he took out his phone and, for the first time in days, typed a response to Cassandra's message. "Don't come. There's something I need to tell you, and I need to do it in person when I get back." The reply came quickly. "What's going on? What are you talking about?" Michael glanced once more at Emma and Lucas, disappearing around the corner before sending the final message. The truth. The local library, with its red brick facade and high-arched windows, stood just as Michael remembered. He hadn't been back here in years, but it felt oddly familiar, even comforting. For the next few days, Michael watched Emma and Lucas from a distance, carefully observing their routine. On Wednesdays, Emma was still running the children's reading program, surrounded by the warmth of the bookshelves. Michael watched her from the doorway of the children's section, his heart a tight knot as she read aloud, her voice gentle and soothing. Lucas was right there with her, his eyes wide and full of wonder, soaking in the stories. "What's the most important part of the book?" Emma asked the children, her eyes scanning the group. "What do you think is invisible to the eye?" Without missing a beat, Lucas answered, his voice clear and confident. "It's with the heart that you see straight." Michael's heart leaped in his chest. Emma smiled at her son, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Exactly, darling." After the reading session, as the other children left with their parents, Lucas lingered, flipping through the pages of another book. Michael took a deep breath, pushing his nerves aside. He approached Lucas, who looked up at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "That's a good book," Michael said, gesturing to the dinosaur story in Lucas's hands. "I loved dinosaurs when I was your age." Lucas's face lit up. "Mine too, but Mum says the Triceratops was cooler because it didn't hurt anyone." Just then, Emma appeared, her face a mask of surprise and tension. "Lucas, time to go," she said sharply, cutting the conversation short. "But, Mom, I was talking about dinosaurs with—" Lucas protested, but his voice was quickly silenced by his mother's firm tone. She waited until Lucas was distracted, putting his things away, before stepping closer to Michael. Her voice was a low hiss. "What do you think you're doing?" "I need to talk to you, Emma." Her eyes flashed with anger. "No, you don't. You lost that right a long time ago." "Please," Michael pleaded, his tone softer now. 5 minutes. That's all I ask." For a moment, Emma hesitated, as if his vulnerability had made an impact. She exhaled sharply, and then nodded. "Tomorrow at noon. Lucas will be at school." The next day, Michael arrived at Charleston Elementary School, the air thick with the excitement of a community baseball game. He stood at the bleachers, dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. His eyes scanned the field until they landed on Lucas, number 7 on his jersey, warming up with his teammates. The boy's intensity, his focus on every pitch, reminded Michael of himself at that age. He had missed so much. Emma sat next to him, maintaining a respectful distance, her voice laced with pride as she spoke about her son's achievements. "Best strike average in the minor leagues," she said, a soft smile in her voice. Michael listened, a pang of regret gnawing at him. He had missed it all, the milestones, the victories, the little moments that defined a childhood. "How did he start playing?" Michael asked, his voice quieter now. Emma hesitated before answering. "It was Richard's idea, actually. He came to every game, said baseball was in the Grayson family's blood." Michael looked at Lucas, his heart heavy with the weight of time lost. He knew this was only the beginning, and while the road ahead was uncertain, he was determined not to miss another moment of his son's life. The mention of his uncle stirred a deep sense of guilt in Michael. How many games had he missed? How many times had he tried to call, only for the phone to go unanswered? The game had started, and Michael watched intently as his son Lucas commanded the pitcher's mound with a focused grace. His posture, his concentration, every small movement was so familiar to Michael, almost as if it were his own youth, mirrored in Lucas's actions. "Strike!" The umpire called for the 3rd time, and Lucas quietly celebrated, his joy contained. "He does that every time," Emma said with a soft smile. "He says he doesn't want to show off in front of the other boys," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done a great job with him." Before Emma could respond, a stir passed through the crowd. Cassandra Winters, immaculately dressed in Chanel and high heels entirely out of place on a baseball field, marched over to them. "Michael Grayson?" she asked sharply, her voice slicing through the air. 3 days of unanswered calls, a breakup over the phone, and now I find you here, watching baseball in a town like this. The game came to a sudden halt. All eyes were on the unfolding confrontation. Lucas, still standing on the mound, looked over in confusion. Emma quickly stood up, muttering something about getting a drink, visibly uncomfortable. "No," Michael said, gently holding her wrist. Turning to face Cassandra, he spoke with a firmness that took even him by surprise. "We need to talk, but not here, not now." Cassandra let out a bitter laugh. "You cancel our wedding over the phone and think you can just— Is that your son?" She cut herself off, eyes fixed on Lucas, who was still watching them from the field. The resemblance between father and son was undeniable, and the air grew heavy with unspoken words. Emma instinctively stepped closer to Lucas, as if to shield him from the tension. "Yes," Michael said simply. "He's my son." Cassandra staggered back as though struck. "How long have you known?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "How long have you known about him?" 4 days, Michael answered quietly. and I've already made my choice." Tears began to streak down Cassandra's perfectly made-up face. "You'll regret this, Michael," she said, her voice cracking. "When the novelty wears off and you realize what you're throwing away, you'll regret it." "No," he cut her off. "My only regret is that it took me this long to see what really matters." Cassandra glanced one last time at Lucas, then at Emma, and finally at Michael. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, the sound of her heels echoing in the silence that followed. The game slowly resumed, but Lucas seemed distracted. His next throw was a rare miss. "He's figured it out," Emma whispered, watching Lucas carefully. "He's not a fool, Michael. He knows what just happened." "I have to tell him," Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tonight. I can't let him hear it from anyone else." Michael's heart pounded. "Do you want me to?" "No," Emma shook her head firmly. "I need to do this. He needs to hear it from me first. After that we'll see." The rest of the game passed in a blur. Lucas regained his focus and led his team to victory, but his celebration was subdued. His eyes kept flicking to the stands, to where Michael and Emma sat. As the game came to a close, Emma stood up. "I'll go talk to him," she said softly. "Please, not today," Michael implored. "He needs time to process this. Let him come to us when he's ready." Before she left, Michael called out, Tell him I'm proud of him, of the game, of who he is. Everything." Emma paused for a moment, and Michael could have sworn he saw a tear in her eye before she turned and walked toward their son. Later that night, alone in his Uncle Richard's mansion, Michael stumbled upon a photo album that had been hidden away in a drawer. Page after page showed moments of Lucas's life: first days of school, birthdays, baseball games. These were the moments that his late uncle had kept, waiting for the day when Michael would be ready to see them. "I'm sorry, Uncle Richard," Michael whispered into the empty room. "But I promise I'll make things right." His phone buzzed. A message from the office in Atlanta. This time he didn't even check it. Some things, he realized, were clearer than ever. The night stretched on, and Michael lay awake, imagining the conversation between Emma and Lucas. The questions, the confusion, the inevitable tears. When morning finally came, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Emma. "He wants to meet you." Breakfast at Miller's Diner. Miller's Diner was a landmark in Charleston, the kind of place Michael and Emma had shared milkshakes at as teenagers. Now, years later, he found himself sitting at one of the same Formica tables, his hands trembling slightly as he waited. The door opened and Lucas entered, holding Emma's hand. His eyes, green just like Michael's, were red, the signs of a restless night. "Good morning," Emma said quietly, guiding Lucas to the table. Michael Grayson sat across from the young boy, who regarded him with an unexpected intensity. The silence between them felt thick, almost oppressive. Finally the boy spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Are you really my father?" Michael's throat tightened as he answered, his words heavy with years of regret. "Yes," he replied, his voice low. "I am." The question that followed hit him hard. "Why haven't you come to see me before?" Emma, who had been sitting beside him, tensed but said nothing. Michael's heart clenched. "I made a big mistake," he said, his words coming out slowly, painfully. I didn't know about you, but that's no excuse. I should have been there." The boy, Lucas, furrowed his brow, clearly trying to process the information. "Grandpa Richard used to talk about you sometimes," he said. "He said you build big buildings in Atlanta." Michael smiled sadly, a mix of pride and pain in the expression. Yes, that's true. Your grandfather. He was very special. He came to all my games. Lucas continued, his voice softening. He said I played just like you when you were my age. Before Michael could respond, a waitress interrupted their conversation, breaking the tension. Lucas ordered pancakes with chocolate syrup, exactly the same as Michael used to order when he was a child. Mum says you're staying in Charleston now, Lucas commented absent-mindedly as he fidgeted with his napkin. Michael nodded gently. Yes, I am. If you want, he said, his voice tender. I'd love to get to know you better, Lucas. Lucas? Lucas corrected him, looking up with a small smile. Everyone calls me Lucas, except when I'm in trouble, then Mum uses my full name. Emma let out a soft laugh, the first sign of relaxation since the conversation began. Breakfast proceeded at a slow pace, with Lucas asking occasional questions about Michael's life in Atlanta, about baseball, and his work. It was striking how much they had in common, even after all these years apart. The same tastes, the same mannerisms. The moment was interrupted by Michael's phone. He glanced at the screen and saw another call from Atlanta. Bernard Wilson, the chairman of the board. Sorry, Michael muttered, dismissing the call. Lucas glanced at him with curiosity. Is this about work? Michael nodded but dismissed it quickly. Yes, but it's not important right now. Emma shot him a skeptical look. Michael, if you need to… No, he cut her off firmly. This is more important. Just as he said that, the phone rang again, and then again, and again. Mr. Grayson, the waitress approached with a landline in her hand. There's an urgent call for you from Grayson Enterprises. Michael sighed in frustration. Excuse me, he said, getting up from the table. As he walked down the hallway of the restaurant, the voice on the other end wasted no time with pleasantries. The board is meeting in an hour, Michael. We're losing the Miller contract because of your absence. Millions are at stake. And if you don't come back to Atlanta today, we'll start voting on your replacement. Michael paused, his eyes glancing back toward the dining area where Lucas was laughing with Emma. His family, his son. Michael turned back to the phone, his voice cold and resolved. Let them vote, he replied, hanging up. When Michael returned to the table, Lucas looked at him, concern on his face. You look worried, he observed, his young face full of innocence. It's nothing, Michael assured him, forcing a smile. He sat back down. Hey, how about we go to the baseball field after school today? We can practice pitching. Lucas's face lit up with excitement. Can I, Mom? Emma hesitated, her eyes meeting Michael's. Finally, she nodded. Of course, darling, but only until 6. You have homework. The rest of breakfast flowed more naturally, and when it was time for Lucas to go to school, he surprised Michael with a quick, shy hug before running out to the car. Michael watched them go, feeling a swell of emotion he hadn't expected. He's amazing, Michael murmured to himself, his eyes still on the car as it drove away. His phone vibrated again, a message from the board. Vote completed, replacement approved. Your lawyers will be contacted. He put the phone away, a serene smile spreading across his face. The empire he had spent years building, the company that had meant so much to him, now seemed insignificant compared to the hug he had just received. Later that afternoon, while teaching Lucas the perfect pitch, Michael finally understood what his uncle had meant all those years ago. Some fortunes, he realized, couldn't be measured in dollars. Dad, Lucas called out, using the word for the first time. Can you teach me that pitch again? And in that moment, Michael knew he had made the right choice. The Grayson Empire's downfall quickly spread through Charleston. The local paper ran the headline, "Local magnate loses control of billion-dollar company," and whispers followed Michael everywhere. But none of it mattered to him anymore, not when he had afternoons on the baseball field with his son. 2 weeks after their breakfast at the diner, a new routine was beginning to form. Michael attended Lucas's games, helped with his homework, and slowly but surely built a relationship with his son. One morning, while sorting through paperwork in his uncle's office, Michael discovered an old box, carefully sealed, with his name written on it in Richard's elegant handwriting. Michael Grayson couldn't believe his eyes when Rose entered the room carrying a tray of tea. "I didn't think I'd find this," she said, setting the tray down gently. "Your Uncle Richard prepared it in the last months of his life." Michael glanced at the box she had placed before him, the weight of it unfamiliar. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of letters, each one addressed to him but never sent. The first was dated 6 years ago. "Dear Michael," the letter began, "today I met your son. Emma was scared and alone, but Lucas is the most extraordinary child I've ever met. He has your eyes, your smile, and that same determination you always had, just like your Uncle Richard. I beg you, come home. There's so much you need to know." As Michael read, the words blurred through a film of tears. Letter after letter revealed moments of Lucas's life that Michael had missed, each one a reminder of a child he never knew existed. His thoughts were interrupted by Rachel, his assistant. "Mr. Grayson," she said gently, "Bernard Wilson is here." Michael stood up, surprised. Bernard, the chairman of the board, entered the office, his sharp suit standing out against the quiet simplicity of the room. "We need to talk, Michael," he said, his voice stern. Rose quietly stepped out, leaving them alone. Bernard wasted no time. "If you think I'm here to convince you to come back, think again," he said, tossing a folder onto the desk. "Your uncle wasn't just a shareholder at Grayson Enterprises. He was the largest single shareholder." Michael furrowed his brow and picked up the papers. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Your Uncle Richard kept his shares secret for years, through shell companies," Bernard explained. "When he passed, those shares were transferred to you. You're the majority owner now. The board can't remove you. You hold the power." The shock hit Michael hard. His uncle, a man he had barely understood, had safeguarded his future, even after Michael had turned his back on everything he'd known. "Why are you telling me this now?" Michael asked, his voice low. "Because Richard made me promise. He said one day you'd understand that there are more important things than business. And when that day came, I was to make sure you didn't lose everything by making the wrong choice." Bernard sat down, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Before Michael could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, her face pale and troubled. "Michael, we need to talk. Now." The urgency in her voice made him stand immediately. "Bernard, can we continue this later?" In the back garden, Emma paced, clearly upset. "Lucas found some old letters in the attic," she said, her voice tight. "Letters I wrote to you when I was pregnant with him." Michael's heart sank. "What did they say?" he asked, the pit in his stomach growing. "The truth," Emma answered, her voice trembling. "I tried to tell you about the pregnancy. I went to Atlanta to find you. She stopped, tears welling in her eyes. "I saw you there, with Cassandra. You looked so happy, so perfect together." She paused, wiping her face. "I was 4 months along. I used every last bit of money I had to find you. And when I did, you were engaged to her." The memory hit Michael like a slap. The engagement party at the Drake Hotel 5.5 years ago flashed in his mind. He had just met Cassandra. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because you seem to have moved on," Emma shouted, her anger rising. "Because I didn't want to be the small-town girl who ruined your perfect life." "Because you still loved me," Michael whispered, his voice softer now. The silence between them was heavy, filled with everything left unsaid. Emma wiped away her tears. "Lucas read the letters," she said. "He knows everything now. How we met, how we fell in love, how we broke up, how I gave up telling you about him. Where is he?" "At the baseball field. He said he needed to think." Michael didn't hesitate. "I'll talk to him." As Michael headed for the car, Emma called out to him. "He found this too," she said, holding out a small velvet box. Inside was the engagement ring Michael had bought for her 6 years ago, the week before their big fight. "You kept it," Michael said, his voice breaking. "Some things are hard to let go of," she muttered. At the baseball field, Michael found Lucas sitting alone in the stands, a stack of old letters beside him. "Can I sit down?" Michael asked softly. The boy shrugged but moved to make space. After a long silence, Lucas finally spoke. "Did you love Mom?" "More than anything," Michael answered honestly. "And now?" Lucas asked, his voice quiet but filled with understanding. Michael looked at his son, so young, yet already so perceptive. "Now I understand that some loves never really go away," he said, his voice steady. "They just wait for the right moment to come back." Lucas picked up one of the letters. "Mom wrote that you were the love of her life," he said. "She hoped I had your smile, your heart." He looked up at Michael. "And you do." Michael Grayson watched his son Lucas with a bittersweet smile. "You've got the best of both of us," he said, his voice low. "Are you leaving again?" Lucas asked, his voice full of hope. "Never," Michael replied firmly, his resolve clear. "Not if it means leaving you behind." Lucas leaned in, resting his head on his father's shoulder. "Promise," the boy whispered. "I promise," Michael murmured, pulling him close. "Some choices, once made, are forever." Father and son sat in silence on the baseball field, the quiet peace between them reflecting the shift in their relationship. The letters they had read had changed everything. They were the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, loss, and the potential for redemption. In the days that followed, the dynamic between Michael, Emma, and Lucas changed. It was as if a heavy veil of secrets had been lifted. One Saturday morning, Michael, feeling the weight of the past few weeks, decided to take another step toward healing. "How about a picnic?" he suggested, over breakfast at Emma's house. It had become a weekend ritual. Lake Monroe, just like old times. Emma froze for a moment, her hands trembling as she set down the pancakes. Lake Monroe was their place. The place where they had shared their first kiss, where they had made plans for the future, and where he had intended to propose to her before everything fell apart. "Please, Mom," Lucas begged, his eyes wide with excitement. "Can we go fishing too?" Emma glanced at Michael, who gave her an encouraging nod. "All right," she said finally, "but you two are in charge of getting everything ready." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Lucas eagerly helped Michael prepare the sandwiches, while Emma packed a basket of fruit and drinks. The simple domesticity of it all was a quiet reminder of what they had lost, and perhaps what they could still find again. At the lake, while Lucas tried out his new fishing rod, a gift from Michael, Emma sat beside him on the plaid blanket, a calm silence falling over them. "This reminds me of that summer," Emma said softly, "before everything happened, before I ruined everything. Michael glanced at her, his voice steady. We both made mistakes. Emma sighed, a soft, regretful sound. I should have fought harder. I should have insisted on telling you about Lucas. Michael paused, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the small velvet box Emma had shown him a few days ago. Did you know I was going to propose here? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That last week before everything fell apart. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Michael, she started, but he gently stopped her. I need to say this, he said. I had everything planned. The sunset, the flowers. I even convinced Pete to play our song on the guitar. But then that proposal from Atlanta came and I lost my way. Dad! Dad! Lucas's voice interrupted, full of excitement. I got one! Both adults watched as Lucas struggled to reel in his first fish, his face a picture of concentration and joy. It was a moment that reminded Michael of his own childhood, how he had spent hours with his father, fishing, laughing and learning. He's amazing, Michael muttered, watching his son. How could I have wasted so much time? He whispered more to himself than anyone else. We're here now, Emma replied softly, her voice calm. That's what matters. The rest of the day passed like a dream. Lucas moved between fishing with Michael and joining them on the blanket for snacks. He asked questions, told stories, and delighted in learning about his parents when they were young. So you met here? He asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. Your mum was reading The Little Prince under that old oak tree, Michael said, pointing to the massive tree near the shore. I was trying to impress her with my fishing skills and ended up falling into the water. Emma laughed at the memory. He came out soaking wet, but still trying to look charming. Did it work? Lucas asked curiously. More or less, Emma smiled. At least I got a date for hot chocolate. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm orange and pink glow over the lake, Lucas finally drifted off to sleep on the blanket, worn out from his adventures. Emma looked down at him, smoothing a lock of hair from his forehead. He looked so peaceful, she murmured. Michael took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Emma, I know it might be too soon, that there's still a lot to rebuild, but... He opened the velvet box, revealing the ring. I'm not asking for anything now. I just want you to know that I've never stopped loving you. Emma's eyes filled with tears and she interrupted him softly. Michael, there's so much between us, so much history, so much pain and so much love. But look at him. She motioned to Lucas, a slee in her arms. Look at our family. Can we have this chance again? Michael's voice was steady, though the question carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. Before Emma could answer, their son stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about flying fish. The two shared a quiet laugh, the tension between them momentarily broken by Lucas's innocent dream. One day at a time, Emma finally responded, her hand finding Michael's on the blanket. Let's rebuild this right, for our family. Michael nodded, slipping the engagement ring back into his pocket, but keeping their hands intertwined as they watched the sun continue its slow descent over the shimmering waters of Lake Monroe. The lake, now a silent witness, saw yet another chapter of their story unfolding. On the drive home, Lucas woke up briefly, his voice soft and sleepy from the back seat. Best day ever, he mumbled, a grin still evident in his words. Michael and Emma exchanged a glance through the rearview mirror, a silent understanding passing between them. Some bridges, once rebuilt, are stronger than they were before. That evening, after leaving Emma and Lucas at home, Michael drove to his uncle's mansion. The old house, so filled with memories, stood silently as he entered the study. There, on the desk, was another letter from Richard, his uncle, always ahead of him, always knowing exactly what he needed to hear. "Dear Michael," the letter began, "true love is patient. It waits, forgives, and rebuilds. By the time you read this, I hope you will have understood that some fortunes cannot be measured in dollars, and that the best investments are the ones we make as a family. Love, Grandpa Richard." Michael fell asleep later that night, the letter resting on his chest, dreaming of future picnics, baseball games, and a family that was finally whole. Autumn arrived in Charleston, filling the town with vibrant colors. The trees on the Grayson estate were alive with deep reds and golden yellows, a striking contrast to the transformation happening inside the mansion. Michael sat at his uncle's old desk, looking over the latest proposal from the Grayson Enterprises board, a tempting offer to buy his shares for an eye-popping sum, with the condition that he completely surrender control of the company. "The documents just need your signature." Bernard's voice crackled over the video chat. "It's a generous offer, Michael. More money than you could spend in several lifetimes." Michael turned his chair toward the window, watching Lucas play in the garden with his new golden retriever, an addition that had come after weeks of coaxing from both father and son. "What if I don't want to sell?" Michael asked, his mind already making plans for something different. Bernard sighed. "Then you'll need to actively take over the presidency. The board can't afford to have an absentee CEO anymore." "What if I ran it from Charleston?" Michael asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "A company the size of Grayson Enterprises, run from a small town." Bernard laughed, but there was no humor in it. The council would never go for it. "The board has no choice," Michael replied firmly, his confidence unshaken. "I'm the majority shareholder. Remember?" At that moment, Emma appeared in the doorway, holding an old box. Her face was pale, the weight of something pressing on her. "Bernard, I need to call you back," Michael said quickly, ending the video conference. "Emma, what happened?" he asked as she placed the box on the table. "I found this in the attic," she said softly. "I think you need to see it." Inside the box were old documents, faded photos, and a diary. The photographs showed Michael's father, Billy Grayson, as a young man, standing next to a man Michael instantly recognized, Emma's father. "Our parents were partners," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "Before the accident, before your father died, they were building something together. Grayson Enterprises didn't start in Atlanta, Michael. It started here, in Charleston." Michael flipped through the pages of his father's diary, uncovering a past he never knew. Grayson Enterprises had begun as a small construction business, founded by Billy Grayson and Daniel Carter Sr. When Billy died in the car accident, Emma's father had been forced to sell his share for a fraction of its worth, just to cover medical bills. "God," Michael muttered, the pieces clicking into place. "That's why your family always resented us so much. That's why my father. That's why he never approved of our relationship." Emma nodded, her eyes heavy with the truth. "He believed that the Graysons had stolen our family's future." At that moment, Lucas rushed into the office, his dog happily trotting behind him. "Dad! Mom! Look what Max can do!" The two adults paused, their worries momentarily forgotten as they watched Lucas proudly demonstrate how he had taught the dog to paw. After the boy left, a quiet calm settled between them. Michael made up his mind. "I'm going to make this right," Michael Grayson declared, his voice resolute. "Michael, it's not necessary," Emma said softly, but he interrupted her gently. "Yes, it is. Not just for the past, but for the future. For our future." Over the next few weeks, Michael threw himself into creating a new vision for Grayson Enterprises. He transformed his uncle's study into an operations hub, equipping it with the latest technology that enabled video conferences with their offices across the globe. Yet his most significant work was the proposal he presented to the board, building a new technology center in Charleston, which would become the company's new headquarters. "We're going back to our roots," he explained during the presentation, "but we're also building toward the future." The most pivotal moment came later, during dinner at the Carter home. Michael, seated at the table with Emma and her father, made a groundbreaking offer. "I want to offer you both an equal partnership in the company," Michael announced. "Not out of charity, not as compensation, but as a recognition of what should have always been." Old Daniel Carter Sr., who had once held disdain for Michael, stared at him in silence for a long moment. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice full of suspicion. "Because some debts need to be paid," Michael replied, "and because I want my son to grow up knowing that we did the right thing." Outside, Lucas was oblivious to the monumental shift taking place within the walls of his family's home. He was too busy playing in the yard with Max, the new dog. But later that night, when his grandfather Carter embraced him, tears welling in his eyes, Lucas sensed that something important had happened, something that would change everything. After putting Lucas to bed, Emma found Michael standing alone on the balcony, staring out into the night. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. "Yes, I did," Michael replied, pulling her close. "For us. For our family." The engagement ring, still tucked away in his desk drawer, waited for the right moment. But standing there under the stars, with the sound of their son's breathing filtering through the window, Michael finally understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't about corporate empires or fat bank accounts. It was about doing the right thing, even if it was long overdue. It was about building something that his son could be proud of one day. $1 for your thoughts?" Emma murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm thinking," Michael said with a smile, "that some fortunes are built on love, not money." And for the first time in a long while, the weight of the Grayson legacy didn't feel so heavy. Winter arrived in Charleston with an unexpected ferocity. A snowstorm was fast approaching, and with it a whirlwind of change that no one could have predicted. Michael was in the midst of an important video conference about the company's transition when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Emma. "Lucas has a high fever. Hospital. Come quickly." Without a second thought, he ended the meeting and rushed to his car, ignoring the first flakes of snow that had begun to fall. At the hospital, he found Emma in the emergency room, her face lined with concern. "Pneumonia," she said, her voice trembling. "He was playing in the snow yesterday." "Mr. and Mrs. Grayson," a nurse called, making Emma blush as the title tightened around Michael's chest like a vice. "Carter," Emma corrected softly. "I'm Mrs. Carter." The doctor's expression was grim as he explained that Lucas's pneumonia was severe and he would need to be hospitalized for intensive care. As they watched their son sleep, connected to monitors and oxygen tubes, Michael felt a fear unlike anything he had ever known. "He'll be fine," Emma murmured, more to herself than to him. "He has to be." The storm worsened through the night, cutting off Charleston from the rest of the world. The hospital, running on generators, was becoming isolated, with impassable roads preventing any supply deliveries. Then the doctor delivered more troubling news. "Lucas needs a specific medication," he said, his face etched with worry. "But with the storm, our supply is running low. Where can we find more?" Michael asked immediately, his mind already racing for a solution. "The Central Hospital in Hartford has it," the doctor replied, his tone uncertain, but with the conditions. "I'll go," Michael said, his voice firm as he grabbed his keys. "Michael." "No." Emma's grip on his arm tightened. "It's suicide to drive in this storm." "He's our son," Michael said simply. The look they exchanged was all the confirmation they needed. In that moment, years of hurt and resentment melted away, replaced by something deeper, something more fundamental. "Then I'll go with you," Emma decided, but Michael gently shook his head. "No," he whispered, brushing his fingers along her cheek. "Lucas needs you here. I promise I'll be back." Before he left, Michael went to his son's room. Lucas lay there tossing restlessly in his bed. His breathing was shallow, aided by the oxygen mask that covered his face. "Dad?" Lucas mumbled, his fever-clouded eyes searching. "I'm here, champ," Michael said, taking his son's small hand in his. "I'm going to get your medicine, okay? Stay strong for me." "Like a Grayson?" Lucas asked, his lips curling into a small smile. "Like a Grayson Carter," Michael corrected softly, kissing his son's warm forehead. "I'll be right back." The drive to Hartford felt like a nightmare. The snowstorm reduced visibility to nearly zero, and more than once, Michael lost control of the car, and the tires sliding dangerously on the slick roads. But he kept going, the thought of his sick son pushing him forward. When he finally arrived at Hartford Hospital, it seemed like an eternity had passed, but he got the medication they needed. The return trip proved to be even more perilous. A fallen tree blocked the main road, forcing Michael to take the old mountain route, a path that brought back painful memories of the car accident that had claimed his father's life years ago. As if fate had set the stage, a deer suddenly darted across the road, and Michael swerved to avoid it. The car skidded, spinning dangerously close to the cliff's edge. For a moment, Michael thought history would repeat itself. But some force, maybe his father's spirit, maybe his own love for his son, guided him, and the car came to a halt inches from the abyss. When he finally reached Charleston Hospital, hours had passed. Emma was waiting for him in the lobby, her face pale, tears frozen on her cheeks. "Thank God," she whispered as she embraced him tightly. I thought I'd lost you too," she murmured. "Never again," Michael promised, handing the medicine to the doctors. The next few hours felt like an eternity, but gradually Lucas began to respond. His fever subsided and his breathing eased. The following morning, when the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Michael watched his son sleep peacefully, while Emma dozed in the chair beside him. It was then that Michael realized the depth of his fear from the night before. It wasn't the storm or the treacherous roads that had claimed his father. It was the fear of losing his family again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the engagement ring he had carried with him since that day at the lake. This time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. When Emma woke, she found the ring on her finger and Michael kneeling beside her. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because we have to, not because it's expected, but because I want to spend every storm of my life by your side." At that moment, Lucas opened his eyes, his faint smile lighting up his face as he saw the scene unfolding before him. "It's about time," he muttered, making his parents laugh through their tears. The storm had passed, leaving behind not only a snow-covered town, but also a stronger, more united family. "Yes," Emma finally answered, her voice breaking as she kissed Michael, and Lucas clapped faintly in approval. 1,000 times, yes. Spring came to Charleston, bringing with it more than just the blossoming flowers. Emma and Michael had planned a simple wedding in June to be held at Lake Monroe, but before that, there was an even more important ceremony to attend to. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Emma asked, adjusting Lucas's tie as they stood in the county courthouse, waiting for the adoption hearing. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," Michael replied, watching Lucas practice his new signature on a piece of paper. The boy had insisted on signing his full name, Lucas Daniel Grayson Carter. Judge Thompson, a warm-hearted woman with silver hair who had known Emma since childhood, led the ceremony with a smile. "Lucas," she said kindly, "do you understand what this adoption means?" "It means I officially have a father," Lucas replied with an honesty that felt far beyond his years. "But actually, he was my father a long time ago," he added simply. His words were so profound that they left everyone in the room moved. Michael squeezed Emma's hand, feeling the weight of the engagement ring on her finger. After the ceremony, they celebrated at Miller's Diner. Lucas, savoring his chocolate milkshake, suddenly asked a question that took them all by surprise. "Can I have a brother now?" Lucas asked, his innocent question catching Emma off guard. She nearly choked on her coffee, while Michael couldn't help but stifle a smile. "One step at a time, champ," he replied, exchanging a knowing glance with his fiancée. Later that day, Daniel Carter Sr., who had slowly come to accept Michael as part of the family, handed Michael the plans. "I thought we could work on it together," he said, his voice warm. "After all, building things has always been a tradition in our families." Michael felt the weight of those words. It wasn't just about a treehouse. It was about healing old wounds, about building bridges between the past and the future. "It would be an honor," he replied, extending his hand to his future father-in-law. On the morning of the wedding, Emma stood before the mirror in the bedroom, adjusting her veil. "Something old," Rose smiled, helping her. "Your mother would be so proud." Lucas rushed into the room, already dressed in his page boy suit, proudly carrying a small blue box. "Something blue," he announced, handing his mother a delicate bracelet. "Dad and I chose it together." Emma hugged her son, taking care not to wrinkle her dress. "You look very elegant, my love," she said, gazing at him with pride, "like a real Grayson Carter." Lucas beamed with joy, making everyone laugh. At the lake, Michael waited nervously under the ancient oak tree where it all began. The spot had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with lanterns hanging from the branches and paths lined with white petals. Bernard Wilson, now a close friend, was adjusting his tie. "Nervous?" Michael asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. "For the first time in my life," Bernard admitted with a smile. "I'm exactly where I should be," Michael said, his heart steadying. As the music began to play, not a traditional wedding march, but La Vie en Rose on the guitar, played by old Pete, Michael's heart swelled. It was the same song he had planned to use years ago in his first unfulfilled marriage proposal. Lucas came first, carrying the rings with comic seriousness. Then everyone stood as Emma appeared, escorted by her father. Michael's heart stopped as he saw her for the first time in her wedding dress. She was radiant, more beautiful than he. The ceremony was presided over by Judge Thompson, who had overseen Lucas's adoption. In a particularly moving moment, the judge invited the boy to stand with his parents. As Michael and Emma exchanged their vows, Lucas stood between them holding their hands. After the vows, the celebration continued into the afternoon at the garden of the Grayson mansion. Night fell over Charleston, the garden lanterns casting a soft glow as a peaceful hush settled over the town. Lucas, exhausted but content, fell asleep in Grandpa Carter's arms. Emma and Michael, tired but elated, danced once more under the stars, now as husband and wife. As they swayed together, Emma whispered in his ear, "I have something to tell you." "What?" Michael asked, noticing the special sparkle in her eyes. "It looks like Lucas's wish for a little brother is going to come true sooner than we thought." Michael stopped mid-dance, his eyes wide with surprise. "Are you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emma nodded, smiling through tears of joy, and there, under the starry sky of Charleston, with his son sleeping peacefully in his arms, and his wife embarking on a new chapter of their life together, Michael Grayson finally understood what true success meant. It wasn't the skyscrapers in Atlanta or the weight of his bank account. It was the love that had built his family's story, brick by brick, moment by moment. Thank you for watching and sharing in Michael and Emma's beautiful journey of love and second chances. If you enjoyed this story, please give us a thumbs up and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more heartwarming stories. Your support means everything to us. See you next time. And remember, true success is found in the love we build with those who matter most.